Now, let's move to our next session. This is called Policing at a Crossroads. Very important, a conversation on reform, reality and the road ahead. And facilitating this session, we welcome good friend of the Federation, Danny Shaw. Danny is a former Home Affairs correspondent, of course, at the BBC for many years, huge experience in journalism, former advisor to Yvette Cooper in opposition, and now a leading commentator on crime and justice issues. Danny, morning to you.
Thanks very much, Ian. Really good to be here and for this debate that we're going to have for the next half an hour or so. We are almost 12 months exactly into the new Labour government, and we are beginning to see the shape of what they are proposing to do on policing and crime. We have a real focus on neighbourhood policing with that promise to put an extra 13,000 police officers, specials and PCSOs into neighbourhoods. Some of them have already gone in. We are seeing a strategy on violence against women and girls due to be launched in the next few weeks. That's another priority area. We've also seen some reforms on knife crime to close legal loopholes, and a wider plan is being developed. But the most far-reaching package of reforms to policing in England and Wales is imminent. Certainly it's being drawn up at the moment. We're expecting to see a white paper in the coming months, probably in the autumn. This will be the biggest package of policing reforms for around 15 years, since Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, introduced police and crime commissioners, abolished the Forensic Science Service, the National Policing Improvement Agency, ACPO, and critically, since she decided that the Home Office should take more of a back seat, scrapping many of the targets and really sort of letting police forces and PCCs dictate policing to a large extent. We're going to see that reversed, and we're already seeing it. We're going to see more of a centralisation of policing, a simplification of structures, and the Home Office leaning in a lot more. They've already set up a new police performance unit, and in the white paper, it's expected that there will be a new organisation proposed, the National Centre of Policing, which will become known as EnCOP. It will be the home of national capabilities such as forensics and air support. It will become a central hub for the procurement of services, including IT. And there will also be, I think, in this white paper, the prospect of further changes to bring counterterrorism policing and serious organised crime closer together. So to debate all of this, I'm very pleased to introduce Charlie Hall alongside me, Strategic Advisor for the Police Federation. Charlie served in policing for 32 years. He spent 8 years as Chief Constable of Hertfordshire Police, and before that he served in the Norfolk Constabulary. And online, also very welcome, is Tom Gash. Tom is the Managing Director of the consultancy Leapwise. He had a series of roles before that, including working as a senior policy advisor in the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit in 2006 to 2007. He worked at the Institute for Government and the Jill Dando Centre of Crime Science. Welcome both. Charlie, first of all, why do we need reform of policing structures in England and Wales?
Well, I think that if you speak to chiefs across the country at the moment, there be generally widespread recognition that some sort of reform is needed. And I think when I joined the service 32, 33 years ago, I remember being interviewed, and one of the questions I was asked was, what do you think about the structure of policing? And I confidently predicted not long into my service it would change. And largely it hasn't changed. We're still operating in a system that, in terms of police forces and boundaries, is pretty much the same system that was put in place in the early 70s. Yes, there's been some collaboration between forces. There's been a little bit of national structures have moved around to some extent. We had the last Labour government put some proposals forwards about strategic forces. Charles Clarke, if you recall, that didn't quite get over the line for various reasons. So we're still operating in what is largely a 1970s structure.
But perhaps it works, Charlie. Perhaps
well,
it's been there for 40, 50 years, whatever.
Yeah,
Perhaps
but I think there's
a
growing recognition that there's some real strain showing in that system. Yes, the system delivers on a local agenda, but we recognise the world, society has all moved on. We now live in a digital world. The nature of crime is far more complex. It crosses boundaries, force boundaries, regional boundaries, international boundaries, in a way that it never did in the 70s. And then if you look at things like global supply networks, that's how the world operates now in terms of procuring vehicles or IT. In the 70s, forces had virtually no IT. They would have had a telephone system, a telephony system for the public to contact them, and a relatively basic radio system to be in contact with their officers, and not too much more beyond that. Obviously, it looks hugely different now. And then if you couple that with the spending review announcements that we'd had, there is a real concern that something needs to be done, because the money, the funding in the system is going to have to change in order to deliver this. And I think there is a growing recognition that there is inefficiency built into that system as to how we move forwards. The devil's going to be in the detail as to what those changes actually look like, and I suspect that's where, when the white paper is seen, that there will be a lot of debate. And one of the real concerns, I think, from chiefs will be, whilst there may be recognition that we need to move to maybe a more centralised structure, maybe some other changes within that, the concern will be that transition period between where we are now and how we get to that end state. And chiefs, I'm sure, will be saying we've still got to deliver a policing service to the public throughout that period, and that will need some really careful design work.
So you have to carry on delivering while you're making structural changes and while there's reform, and that's always really difficult, particularly when spending is so constrained. So if I can bring in Tom Gash. Tom wrote a paper, co-authored a paper with Rick Muir from the Police Foundation, who is now policing advisor in the Home Office, which I think it's fair to say forms the basis of the government's plans on policing. Tom, can you talk us through what you proposed at the time?
Yes, so it's not that we think that local policing isn't the foundation here. I think the core thing about policing is you need to be close to communities and connected to communities. And actually, that's a really local thing, because even in a police force, you're dealing with lots of different types of population, community groupings. You're also dealing with communities who are online. It's that connection and sense of understanding what people want and providing the right sort of service, reassurance, influencing behaviour change for those communities and for victims in particular is still the bedrock of policing. I think exactly what Charlie said is the core rationale here for building something a bit more robust at the centre of policing. So the things that don't make sense at the moment are, consultants like me going around to policing and saying, would you like a solution to improve your leadership development support offer? And then technology companies coming in saying, look, I've got a great new system. And in each force, there will be someone considering, in Warwickshire or Gloucestershire or whatever, there'll be someone considering what the right cars are, what the right technology is, what the right leadership development offer is. All of these sort of enabling services that make policing work, that get the right tech and equipment in the hands of the front line. They are really important. I'm sure everyone here cares what cars their colleagues are in and how the software works. It's immensely frustrating, but it doesn't work right. But the problem is, at the moment, you do that 43 times. And on top of that, you have to get it approved many times by both the Chief Constable and the Police and Crime Commissioner. So decision-making is incredibly slow. And that's not driving effective outcomes. So it's not driving effective sort of efficiency. So you're spending more than you need to because you're buying lots of different types of solution. But I'm not someone who believes in a big monolithic system of support. So one contract, one type of car across the country, one IT system, everything the same. But you need someone at the centre who's saying, okay, well, these 3 or 4 suppliers are the ones who are doing a great job, and these are the ones we're going to contract with. And when one of them's doing a bad job after a few years on the RMS system, your niche or your Athena or whatever you're using, they will then say, well, this one's no good anymore, and they'll manage that out of the market and bring in someone new. And basically, it'll be a lot cheaper, a lot more effective, and get the front line more support they need. So the key rationale is around getting the right support, enabling services around policing. But there's a secondary thing here, which is like some of those services are also in areas like forensics, etc., kind of much more critical to the front line. And there's also improvement work that needs to be done nationally. So there's no point kind of everyone figuring out how they improve their response to rape and sexual offences, for example, at the same time. And that's why things like Operation Soteria have sort of had some benefit nationally and are a good example of what can be done. But that was a startup. So whenever they wanted to do an improvement initiative in policing, whenever we want to do an improvement initiative, someone from some force somewhere who's really passionate about something, alongside their day job, starts thinking about how things can get better, builds a mini organisation in one of our various organisations, NPCC, the college, in a host force locally, and then they kind of build this thing, and then when the political flavour of the munch flavour of the munch or priorities change, then that might just disappear, and no one learns what they learned about how to improve policing across the country, and it just sort of fades and dies. So there's something here as well about having a stability for the system, so that you actually start to know, how do we improve the system in a consistent way, and how do we not let forces locally deal with the chaos they currently have to deal with. So all the different initiatives uncoordinated from all these different national bodies. And so there's one thing is about building the right support capabilities more cost effectively, and the other is just improving the coordination at the moment, because at the moment forces are being told to do a million things at once, and it's just not sustainable or feasible, and that impacts all the way through to the front line.
So some people listening to this, that will make perfect sense, but I think perhaps what will worry them is that you're just going to create some new body. I mean, the government's talking about this national EnCOP, National Centre of Policing, but we've already got the College of Policing, we've already got the MPCC, we've already got Blue Light Commercial, we've already got the Police Digital Service. There's probably some other bodies in there that I haven't even mentioned. I mean, this will just suck up more resources, won't there be a headquarters staff and all the rest of it? Is that what you were envisaging, or streamlining?
Effectively, it's amalgamating those organisations into one main entity, EnCOP, that you would try and do. So they actually share all of the overheads and costs of running, but they start to coordinate what is currently a really uncoordinated set of activities. So when you talk about something like improving fleet, well, we need to understand the operational requirement across police, and that's going to involve operational COPs, and particularly our national leads on local policing, working out what they need. But then it's going to flow into procurement. And then, there may be other implications around technology, for example. You might say that we need to have better technology in all of our fleet around making sure we've got better geospatial awareness or whatever it is. And then that will all flow together. So the idea is you have a lot of those capabilities now in the same organisation, and you start to get some better coordination.
And Tom, how much money could this save? Because that's critical, isn't it? If hundreds of millions of pounds could be saved through joint procurement, through better coordination of some of these services, that could be ploughed back into the front line, couldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, is there the potential there to save those sorts of sums?
Well, certainly. We have done work with relevant organisations, the Home Office and Blue Light Commercial, to identify the sort of commercial efficiencies that are possible. To be honest, there's big debates about that number. I personally think it's about 100 million a year, maybe a bit more, and some people will want that number to be a lot bigger, and there'll be a pressure to say this is, it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of savings and they'll happen overnight. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be quite hard won. And 100 million sounds a lot of money, but in the context of the 15 billion or whatever we're sort of spending in policing, it's not actually a huge amount, and it doesn't fully fund all of those new neighbourhood officers. So there is a real question about where is the productivity going to come from beyond renegotiating contracts, doing things more consistently. But the big prizes there around kind of better buying of energy, more standardised fleet, maybe 8 to 12 vehicles across the country. All those things are there. They're real efficiencies. We should go and get them now, but there will be more work to do, and I am worried for policing about how it squares the circle of all of the current government ambitions on VORG, knife crime, neighbourhood policing, with the budget settlement that's just been received from the Treasury, which is not what anybody here would have liked to see.
So, Charlie, very tight budget settlement. We've heard about some of the plans that Tom has outlined and the government is thinking of. It sounds to me, though, like you would like to see things go further and amalgamate some of these 43 police forces.
Yeah.
Do you think the government should be more ambitious?
Well, I don't think that's currently on the table.
It's not.
That's
no.
not in their thinking
should it be?
At the moment. I think probably there's a challenge enough in delivering the centralisation that Tom's described. If that shows successes, I think it may naturally then flow on to a conversation around is the local structure right? As Tom rightly says, you've got to be careful you don't throw out the strengths that policing has in this. And the reason that structure has sustained is because although the nature of criminality and what policing deal with has changed, fundamentally, the vast majority of it still is based in the local, in communities, and that is a strength of the way policing is structured.
But you can keep that with a merged structure. You still keep, local officers, neighbourhoods on the ground.
Yeah.
It's more about a sharing of some of the back office functions, the payroll,
and I think
IT.
when you get to that centralised point, and some of the functions that forces have currently got responsibility for are more remote to them, more in a centralised structure, they don't have the same responsibility for delivering those functions. I think it will naturally lead on to say, well, what is left within the local force structure, and there must be further gains and efficiencies that we can have. So I think it's a bit like as night follows day. I think once the centralisation happens and there is more central direction and there's more national control over procurement, IT, I think the natural conversation will then come to forces. That will be a very interesting one, because I think there's a lot of police chiefs, PCCs are very proud, I think, of the service that they deliver. They are very embedded in the local. The PCC model that was brought in emphasised the local more than anything else. That will bring some politics into where that goes. But I think if you can provide the reassurance that this enables the local, if anything, to be strengthened even further by maybe removing some of the more senior structures that are a bit more remote from the localised delivery. I sense there could be a way through it, but there's bound to be a load of politics wrapped up in it.
Tom, did you look at the Police and Crime Commissioner model and whether that's been a success? It's 2012, the first elections, 13 years in. Have they made a massive difference to policing? Have we got more accountable? Have we got better policing as a result of PCCs?
I don't think the evidence is really in yet, but we need something there in terms of local accountability. So it used to be police authorities, which were kind of groups of people, and now it's an individual who's a PCC. I think as long as there is a body there that is accountable locally for doing it, that will be an improvement. Of course, the big shift that's happening is that mayors are taking on oversight of policing, and there are an increasing number of mayors, and I think that's really interesting. So if you think about, Surrey and Sussex will have mayoral Hampshire, we'll have Norfolk and Suffolk with one mayor across the area. I think there are some really interesting developments there. So I think the advantage of mayoral governance, I personally think it's a really strong model. It's that you can start to connect policing to linked services, so you can have a better conversation. And mayors got more clout and influence. So in Greater Manchester, even though Andy Burnham doesn't have control of the NHS, he can have a pretty meaningful conversation about right care, right person, making sure that you've got the right support around people in mental health crises, vis-a-vis them all ending up in police cells overnight and things like that, which happens across the country routinely and takes a huge amount of time and is a huge cause of anxiety and stress to custody officers and so forth. So I think mayors are really interesting because they have more clout, more influence, and if they oversee policing, they can start to connect services, and they tend to be a bit more visible, so a bit more genuinely publicly accountable and responsive. So I'm really positive about that model. We have to be careful we don't end up with mayors holding policing to account kind of in that collaborative way, and PCCs being more kind of parochial and less focused on those kind of big prizes and bringing in extra money, because that's the other thing mayors can do. They've, in a number of places like West Yorkshire, they've managed to bring in additional funding from transport funding streams, for example, to get PCSOs on public transport. So there's some really interesting things mayors can do. I think we do need some sort of local governance. Otherwise, you end up with sort of a very remote accountability, and it's only going to be driven by the national politics and the media. Yeah. I think local concerns really matter. Secondary point would be, if we're creating EnCOP, one of the things that we've been really clear about, Rick and I, in the paper we wrote on the EnCOP and its future, is that body needs to be accountable and respond, not just to central government, but it almost also needs some sort of check and balance locally, because there's nothing worse than a sort of dead hand, powerful authority from the centre saying, you must have this IT system, if it's not very good. And there's got to be feedback loops and ways of chiefs and others feeding back and saying that's not what we want, and making sure that the leadership of that organisation is accountable.
Just finally, because we're running out of time, but your paper also looked at a vision in the future where the counterterrorism policing was taken away from the Met and sort of brought together with the National Crime Agency.
Yeah.
Now, we may not get that in the next few years, but it's certainly a theme that's on the table, from what I understand.
Yeah.
What was briefly, Tom, what was the thinking behind that?
So I've always been personally in favour of counter-terrorism policing can stay geographically headquartered with the Metropolitan Police, but I've always felt it needs to have a national line of accountability and responsibility that's separate from the Metropolitan Police. It's just for the Metropolitan Police, actually, for the benefit, because the Metropolitan Police has it's accountable to the Home Secretary and accountable to the Mayor, two big, powerful figures who don't always want the same things. Certainly didn't for the last 10 years. And so that was a really tough spot for that service to be in, and I think has had consequences for them. So that's one issue. But bringing counterterrorism and serious and organised crime policing and actually intelligence services increasingly into coordination is a clear requirement, whether that happens structurally or not, because we're just not a country that can afford to be building 3 different cyber capabilities across these different organisations. That doesn't share information effectively across these systems. We just can't afford it. So we need to find a way of doing that collaboratively.
Quick last word. Charlie, do you think that will be well received by your former colleagues, the chiefs, across the country?
I think they can see that as a possible direction of travel. I think they'll be back to, in doing that, you need to make sure you can keep that operational capability running. It's essential to keep that running. So I think it would be with some slight nervousness because they'd want to see the detail of the plans. I think probably the wider point I'd want to just make on police reform is the role of the Police Federation in this, because we've talked about this. The Police Federation, in my view, need to come to a view on where they stand on the reforms. When they get the white paper, are they supportive? Because actually it's in a powerful position to be able to influence and drive and express the voice of the members as to whether they are supportive of a nationally driven structure that's going to centralise more functions, whether they see benefits in that for them, or whether the current system is the one that needs to be sustained. So, I think the National Board and others are going to need to help work that position up so that we can make sure there's an effective voice from the Federation going into government around this as well.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good note to end on. Charlie Hall, thank you very much. Tom Gash, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed that debate on police reform, the white paper expected in the autumn.